Welcome to Landmark Implement's customer support help videos. These will help you diagnose common issues in a timely manner. When contacting the AMS helpline, you must leave a message. The message is then sent out to all of our CTS employees. The first CTS to get it will then return your call. Also, stay connected with Landmark. Download the Landmark app today.
In this session, we're going to talk about the corn head. We're going to try to give you some ideas on what to do as far as getting ready, field ready. One of the first things I recommend, like the other stations have talked about, the single point hookup, making sure that it's clean. The one thing that I want to remind customers about is the fact that, like when we're hauling this machine down the road, we get ready to pull into a field and hook up, make sure that's good and clean. If we're not good and clean, them little valves in there, that grit on that face of that thing, when we hook that up, we have a tendency to push that grit inside of them valves, and it messes up the O-rings. So, just a reminder, they tell you to use the contact cleaner rather than to use the brake clean, because the brake clean's hard on the electrical. But, it's one of the first things I like to touch base on. And from that point, we're going to get our head hooked up on our combine, and we're going to start to look it over. One of the things that I recommend people to do is take a look at our gathering chains. We need to make sure that they flex properly. We have the proper adjustment here, like the book says. If they don't flex properly, we need to make sure we maybe need to clean them up, get the mud and dirt out of them. We want to take a good look at our chains to make sure they're not too worn. We want to look at our sprockets to make sure they're in good shape. One of the things, like with this particular unit, these chains are starting to show a little bit of wear. We could actually reverse them side to side so that we can change the direction of our wear a little bit on our rollers. Same way with our sprockets, and at the same time we can check our sprocket bearings to make sure they're in good shape. From that point, I would suggest that we take a look at our snap and rolls and our deck plates. We want to make sure our deck plates are in a good shape. For example, these are starting to show a tiny bit of wear. One of the things that I recommend to customers is to put a new bead of hard face on these deck plates right down along this edge here. As the stocks go down through, they have a tendency to wear these at an angle. If we put a little bead of hard face on there, we can fix them so that they last a little longer. Another point that we want to look at is our throat at the back of our row unit here. We want to make sure that this is in good shape. If it's got a groove worn in it, we need to take care of that because that causes a hairpinning issue. And we definitely don't need them problems. Same way with our snap and rolls. We want to make a good look at them. These are starting to get flat on the edge, so they're not doing a good job of pulling the stocks and cutting the stocks down through, and that'll cause a hairpinning issue. Another area we want to look at is our stripper plates underneath. We want to make sure that they're set in good shape, because if they're not, then we're not doing a good job on our final pull through on our stocks. With that note said, this is a chopping corn head. One of the issues we want to take a look at is our knives on our chopping corn head. We want to make sure they're in good shape. As you can see, these are reversible. You can reverse them to wear on the other side. Once they're worn out on both sides, then they need to be replaced. Our lever to engage and disengage our chopping unit. Say we were in some dry land corn that we wanted to leave a little more matter and a little more stock. Maybe we'd want to turn them all off so that we're leaving our little more mass. Our dipstick plug, this particular unit is filled with oil. There's a couple different check plugs that we need to check the oil in this whole unit. On the earlier series, there was a Greasezerk back here and a dipstick in the check plug. One of the things that we want to make sure there, I tell customers to run the machine just a little bit, stirs that grease around, and then when you put your grease gun on there and take your plug out and start to check it, as you pump some grease in, as the grease starts to roll up to the front of the gearbox, we want to leave a little bit of head space. The reason for that is our heat expansion, but then we know we've got our unit greased properly. And from there, another thing we want to take a look at is our curtains on this particular unit down underneath for our residue control. They're starting to get some wear in them. We want to make sure that they're in good shape, make sure they're still there. Some of these units on the ends where these curtains are, they're getting bad shape, so we want to take a good look at that. Another issue is, like if we would happen to get into some down corn, we can take and adjust our snouts. We can change the pitch of our snouts out front so we can change our head level on the ground. Another thing we can do is, like they talked about earlier, is our faceplate on our feeder house. With the adjustment here, we can change that faceplate setting so that we can bring our head down to a different angle to help us go under that material to help it feed in better. This particular corn head has wear pads along the side here, a nice feature that they come with in the later units, but we want to definitely take a look at our hoods to make sure that we don't have any excessive wear in these. If we have some holes worn, we'll have a problem with trash flow going through the machine. Another area we want to take a look at is our header height sensors. We want to make sure this is all in good shape. You know, if we were having a problem trying to calibrate our head, it might be that our sensors are out of range. It might just be because we got some wear issues. So, you know, these parts are all replaceable. We need to take a good look at that. Another area we need to take a look at is on both ends of the corn head is our drive units with our chains. We need to open up and make sure our chains are adjusted properly. We need to make sure our oil level is in good shape. You know, we may need to change oil if the oil doesn't look too good. Another area is our auger drive chain. We want to take a good look at that, make sure our chain's in good shape. That's one of the areas that gets forgotten, so we definitely want to take a look at that, make sure our sprockets and chain are in good shape. And probably one of the last things that we always forget is our floor underneath our auger. You know, we drive up to it and we look at it, well, we don't really see any holes. But one of the things I suggest the guy does is take a look and take his pliers out or whatever you got available and tap on it. You know, if that thing sounds like that beer can or that pop can that you drank out of last night, maybe we need to take a look at that before we get into the season. One of the reasons I say that is, you know, it may be looking good now, but as we get started, maybe we'll wear a hole. Well, that little hole will become a big hole, and then we'll lose ears through that. So with that, you know, just some pointers to help you out through harvest.
Next thing we're going to talk about is a few of the adjustments on the bean head. Biggest thing is double checking your hold down brackets on the proper adjustment. And what you should do is hold them down, and if you fold a dollar bill in half, you should be able to slide it right underneath the hold down. And to adjust it, there's just one little bolt right on the back. You tighten it or loosen it to adjust on how tight the hold down is to the sickle. And the other thing to do is kick it on, run it for a couple minutes, and then shut the head off in the machine and do a heat check. You can just kind of feel how hot the hold down is, and if it's too hot, you need to back it off a little bit more. The other thing to do is check the finger position on the timing. There should be about 5/8 gap between the finger and the bottom of the, just behind the stainless plate. If you have too much gap, it'll miss product going in. If you're on short beans, it might bunch up a little bit easier. And then the other thing to check on is how high your reel is to your sickle. If you have a Hydroflex unit, pressurize the system so the sickle comes all the way up, and then lower your reel all the way down and all the way back, and you should have about 1.5 inch gap between the reel fingers and the sickle. Otherwise, you might shave off some of your fingers if you hit bumps or anything like that. And if you're on rough terrain, you might want to raise that up a little bit more so you don't shave the middle section of your reel fingers off. Other than that, if there's any other adjustments, just contact one of us if you have any questions on them.
Alright, today we're going to learn about some field adjustments and some maintenance issues on a 600 series Hydroflex draper. The first thing I want to talk about is our feed drum. We've had some issues in some different crops of crop material wrapping around the edge of the drum, right where it makes that transition. If you'll look on this feed drum, you'll see it's got an extra finger to the side. That's kind of an improvement on some of the later models. You can retrofit your older draper to this. If you want a cheaper solution, they do have an anti-wrap kit available through the parts department. They also have a plastic finger that you drill holes and it self-taps to the drum as well. Something else that's pretty important on these drapers is a cutter bar. Besides from keeping the guards and sections in good shape, we also want to keep our hold downs adjusted properly. The spec in the book is 5 to 12 thousandths. Now, I know a lot of you don't carry a feeler gauge with you, so we have a cheaper solution. Go to your billfold and pull out a business card, and that'll work for a feeler gauge. If you don't have a business card, you can get $1 out of your billfold, fold it in half, and that'll be your feeler gauge to get you set. The reel, it's probably the most overlooked component on the header. The reel has a pretty important job in between picking up down entangled crops so we can cut it, but it also feeds our crop into the platform. Misconception that I see a lot is the reel is to coax the crop material into the platform and not to beat it into submission. The wrong reel setting as far as speed and height can cause a lot of field loss, because if we thrash the grain before it gets to the combine, we increase our field loss. Notice right here I have a wide finger attachment clipped onto the reel, and what we're trying to do here is this gains us our reel to crop contact surface area. One thing you might notice on these drapers is right here in the center section, your short crops will kind of build up and hang out right here, and with the addition of these, we're trying to help eliminate some feeding issues. And something we can try first, if you don't want to go all the way solid, is you can go every other one, and that seems to work as well. Kind of while we're in front of this draper, I want to talk about some underfeeding issues. For those of you who don't know what underfeeding is, it happens when you have crop material that's coming in on your side belt, and it gets dragged underneath the platform by the side belt, and it gets thrown out on the ground. A way to find this is to go back behind the machine, and you'll find it as unthreshed heads and whole bean plants that are laying on the ground. Before we start searching for an issue with the combine, maybe we ought to look here for an underfeeding issue. A couple things that can cause an underfeeding issue. Number one is belt speed. If we have our belt speed too fast, our material off this belt will kind of slide over, and this other belt will grab it and pull it underneath the machine. Okay, so you can be too fast. With that said, you can also be too slow. And if we're too slow with our belt speed, our material hangs up right here, and this belt will grab it and pull it under. A good way to set our side belt speed, because I don't have a magical number for you, is to look at your crop mat on the belt. If we have what looks like a bale start to form right here, our side belt speed's too fast. If you go to the edge of the platform and you start to have a slight buildup of material at the edge, our belt speed's too slow. As a rule of thumb, we want to start out at the edge, and you want that crop mat to steadily get taller as you reach the center here. As far as over here, I have some other optional equipment for our milo growers. Milo guards, we have a couple different varieties to choose from. This is a pretty good guard. Over here we have a wire type guard. It's been around forever. There are some limitations to this guard. It doesn't like to go across the row as well as this plastic guard here. And there are some options that you can put on this milo guard to kind of help with some grain loss. Another thing that we can do in all crops is we can change the pitch of our pickup fingers on the reel. There's an adjustment on both sides along with our reel speed and height. If those don't seem to be working, we can add equipment to our platform. Over here we have a crop lifter. It's been around since the first combine was built. Whoops. Some old technology, but it still seems to work. Alright, on the right hand side of the header, we're just going to talk about this knife head right here. Something unique to these drapers where we have a twin knife drive. It's what we call an opposed knife drive. And what I mean by that is our knife heads are out or they're in. We do this for two reasons. Number one is for vibration, and the next is for a quality of cut. Like anything that's timed, we may need to check our timing. If I was to do so, I would take a look at these two bolts right here that bolt the knife head to our gearbox, and I would grab this drive line and I would turn it until our bolts are facing out. And what that does is it gets us on our outermost stroke on our knife head, and then I'm going to go around to the other side and look at the bolts to see if they're in the same position. Let's say, for example, they're not. I'm going to go back to this drive line and I'm going to disconnect it from this gearbox, and I'm going to turn the drive line until we're back in time. Once we're back in time, I'll put the drive line back on and we're good to go. Another area on this drive line, there's a Greasezerk right here on this slide where it telescopes, and I think it's a Greasezerk that kind of gets overlooked in my area anyway. It should be a daily Greasezerk, especially when we're in a flex position. And the reason for that is it follows the cutter bar follows the ground. So you have this drive line that's moving in and out all day long. So we want to keep that good and lubed to prevent some wear. Back behind this shield we have our knife drive gear case. Something that's unique to these bigger machines is so there's a flywheel on the gear case to kind of help eliminate some of our vibrations as well, because we're taking something that is a rotary motion and turning it into a reciprocating motion. And this flywheel, we've had an issue on a couple of headers that have some acres and some hours on them, is the retaining nut that holds the flywheel on is backed off, and then the flywheel becomes loose and it'll actually damage that gear case. So it's a good pre-seasonal check. 90-degree gear case for our knife drive. There's a gear case on the other side. A pre-harvest maintenance would be to make sure we're full of oil in this gear case. These flex drapers have 4 flex height sensors. There's 1 on each side, and then there's 2 in the center for our flex position. Now on this bigger machine we have 2 side belts that run in tandem. And with that said, we have 1 adjustment for both belts, and that's this bigger nut right here. And how this works is we take our outside idler rolls. There's 1 on the outside, and then there's another one next to the center feed belt. And we take those rollers and we move them out to tension the belts and in to loosen the belts. And with that said, anything that moves can wear. And over time we may have a tracking issue with these 2 belts. And that's the job of this little adjustment right here. What we're doing here is we're taking our idler rolls and we're trying to make them parallel with our drive rolls to compensate for wear and to fix a tracking issue that we may have. Now we're going to go around to the back side of the draper. Talk about some more belt tension. On these bigger models we have this really nice gauge. It's color coded, got all kinds of colors on it, and we see our needle right here. We're in the green, so we're good to go. But however, there is something I want to caution you on. It's recommended for normal conditions that we err on the side of being loose, and you can see right here we're just on the inside of our pointer, but we're still in the green. So I would call that ready to go to the field. An easy way to remember at a glance to see if you're just on the side of being loose or just on the side of being over tight is your needles right here. The closer they are to the combine, the looser the belt is. So that's an easy way at a glance to know where you're at. On our bigger machines we have 2 side belts. This would be our side belt drive gear case and our hydraulic drive motor. Something that we found to be a wear item is we need to inspect. We need to remove this bolt and this bolt right here, and the gear case and this drive motor comes off. And what we need to do is we need to look at the splines where the gear case and the drive rolls meet. We've had an issue with the grease that the factory fills this with, dries out and turns into dust, which now we have a metal on metal wear point, which wears a lot faster than it should. So we need to pull it off, look at the splines, and then refill it with grease or an anti-seize as far as a lubricant as a periodic maintenance. This would be our center flex sensor. There's one directly on the other side of our feeder house opening. Center belt, we haven't talked about him yet. And if you'll look through here, you can see an adjustment for that center belt. And it's kind of like our old style of drapers. There's just a welded nut on a shaft, and we want that nut flush with the side sheet to be at the correct tension. Now we look here, it's something new to a platform. It kind of looks like a controller, but it's not. This is for our belt slippage system that we have on these drapers. And what it does is it reads 4 sensors that are on all of our idler rolls. And if it detects a belt slippage issue or an idler roll that's not turning, it actually shuts the feeder house off to help prevent any damage to those side belts. Moving on to our feed drum, we have our metal fingers, but we can still change our timing on our metal fingers with this handle right here, just like we could on our auger type platforms. Just loosen some bolts and we can turn this handle, and from the factory they're preset at 5/8 of an inch, I believe, and that should be adequate for all of our feeding conditions. Gear cases, I haven't talked about them yet. This would be our center drive gear case. It drives our feed drum and our center draper belt. This would be our main gear case. We have our drive line coming off the combine, which gives us power in, and another drive line back here to drive our center drive gear case. And then we also come up here to this drive line, which drives our knife drive. This drive line runs from end to end. It does have some protection built into it. We have a radial pin slip clutch right here. There is a Greasezerk back behind this black plastic shield. And my recommendations for greasing this is 1 or 2 shots before the season, and then forget about it. It kind of goes with that old saying, no grease is bad, too much grease is even worse. So a little bit of maintenance here. And then we have these 2 side belt gear cases on these bigger models. There is some oil in it. It holds a whopping 7 ounces of oil. And along with this gear case and these other gear cases on the back, we want to check the oil level with the machine or with the header on the ground. Our oil level capacity is fairly important on this gear case. Back behind on the front side of this gear case, about 3/4 the way up, there is a breather on this gear case. And as we run through the field, the header sits at an angle like this, in relationship to the ground. And we want to make sure that it's not over full, because then oil's trying to escape that breather, and then dirt's attracted to the breather, and then the breather plugs. We build up with pressure, and then we try to have an oil leak out the seals of this little gear case. Single point, you've probably heard about it already, but I think it's a fairly important item on these platforms. It's recommended we use electrical contact cleaner to keep these components clean, because you can get dirt and small rocks in here that damage the O-rings, not only on this side, but on the combine side as well. And why electrical contact cleaner is recommended is right here at this electrical connector. This electrical connector is kind of unique. It has plastic fingers inside of this connector that hold the pins in place. And other solvents and cleaners have a tendency to do one of two things to these plastic fingers. It either turns them into jello or it makes them brittle and then they break. And with some of our, like our belt slippage system, and we also use electronic power to shuttle a valve to shuttle in between our reel raise and our cutter bar float system. So if we don't have any electrical going from the combine to the header, you're not going to be harvesting until we can get this fixed.
Would you like a support video produced for an additional topic? Please email guides@landmarkimp.com. For further support, contact your Landmark location. Landmark Implement, building our business one satisfied customer at a time.